All right, let's get into this. I'm Glenn. Welcome to my show, The Business of Making Art. All of my material is for people who love what they do, or more likely, they want to love what they do. So I'm going to talk to some people from Atlantic Canada about their work and what it takes to make something of yourself here on the East Coast. My guest today is Elle Jones. Elle is an artist, an advocate, a journalist, and she teaches at Mount St. Vincent University here in Halifax, in Atlantic Canada. If you aspire to do any endeavor that involves art or advocacy, whether that's a full-time occupation or something you do on the side, then you're going to want to listen to this with your ears wide open. Elle, I am, like I said, I think I told you this earlier, but I'm going to tell you again. I'm really excited you're here. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I followed your career by virtue of working a communications desk and following media. I remember the news release from then Halifax Regional Municipality installing you as Poet Laureate for the city. And here you are. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent. I want to have a discussion today about what it takes to make something of yourself here in Atlantic Canada. Specifically, I want to talk about what the process of being an artist and the process of being an advocate have in common. I want to talk about this because I feel like Atlantic Canada is a really harsh setting for either of these endeavors. And there might be stuff like going against us just by virtue of us being the little provinces on the East Coast. So before we get started, I just want to ask you, Elle, what do you think of the fact that what we're doing right now is for Atlantic Canada?
Yeah, I mean, you sort of alluded to it when you said that we're sort of on the margins, Like I can think of, particularly when I was writing for the Examiner a lot, there's so many stories I wrote in the Examiner that other news would do 2 years, 3 years later. I think I was the first person to write about Bell Let's Talk, for example, in their prison phones. And then like 3 years later, you're seeing that in papers in Ontario. So I think there's always so much going on here. There's so many brilliant minds. There's so much art. There's so much community work. When I travel, people are often surprised at the kind of things that I'm doing, AKA that we're doing in this province, things that are sort of normal here. So I think embracing that, I actually don't agree with the idea. I mean, we are marginalized, but I don't actually think we're marginal. I think we have such a long history here and so many different communities and so many things going on. And I think we often, there's this thing I was used to say, like, if you stay here, then people are like, oh, you must not, like, you can't be that good because if you meant anything, you would be in Toronto or New York, you'd be in the States, you wouldn't be here. So if you're still here, you ain't all that, And I think we need to kind of lose that, and not think that we have to get out of here in order to make it or be seen or be doing something meaningful. So I think since I've been here, I've always really embraced that I am where I am and that you work from where you are and you don't have to seek something else. So I think that's really important for us in Atlantic Canada.
I think I'm on that same page in that I always feel like Atlantic Canada, especially growing up. I grew up in Yarmouth, which is a small community on the very southwest tip of the province, 3 hours out of the city. I always kind of felt like all of Atlantic Canada is kind of a best kept secret. To your point, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here in that we have a beautiful setting. We have there are great people here. There are people from all walks of life. And there's a lot of room for entrepreneurship. And this is a great place if you were an artist and wanted to concentrate and focus on what you were doing.
And I think it's also a place where you can work on a lot of things, which is how I work. I'm not somebody that likes to do one thing and then just do it. And that's my thing. I like to constantly be doing different things, like doing journalism, doing poetry, doing activism, doing academia, this research, that research. So I'm somebody that likes to be in a lot of different areas. And I think that's something you can really do in a place like Halifax. It's small enough that you can kind of get into what you want to get into. You can get to know people in the field you want to get to know. There's also, I think, lots of opportunities beyond your field. This is going to sound left field for you because I know we're talking about art, but I'm a runner and I run with the Road Hammers. And that's actually a really good cross section because you run with people that are lawyers and people that are, business people and just in all these different fields, people working in fields. And it's just a good example of how you have this group of people that may not have too much in common, but then because of the way Halifax is, we're able to get together. And then it turns out that often you'll end up getting an invite to somebody's law firm to speak, or to somebody's, they work for government and then their friend talked about you, So I think I think that's something that's really positive here. Like you kind of get referred to things and you're able to expand what you do. And that's been really important for my practice, I think.
I'm seeing that too in the business world. I've been going to a lot of events with the Halifax Partnership, for instance, and one of the events I went to recently was they had tech companies from overseas coming over and meeting people in the business community, and these people they seem really excited about that. A lot of people from India, and they were excited about the prospect. Because that's what Halifax Partnership does. They try to help people. They want to convince or help people get established here in Halifax. They want to convince them to set up a base here. And there was a lot of excitement. I think they were seeing the benefits of having a base in Halifax. Is that kind of what you're saying in terms of people coming here and seeing what we have to offer?
Yeah, and I also think as an artist too, I think that for me, again, I'm not going to speak for every artist, but for me and what I write about, where my work is political, my work is often grounded in storytelling from community. It's grounded in relationship. My book was called Abolitionist Intimacies, with intimacy being about building relationship and love, and that kind of closeness that we have when we do this work. And so for me, I think that part of what I've always thought when people hear my work, not that I want to sort of praise myself or anything, but what I kind of get from people is, because I'm actually living and doing the things I talk about, that's what makes it meaningful and sincere. And that's what people are relating to. So as an artist, I think it would be strange to go somewhere else, but then continue to write as though I was still doing the things that I've stopped doing. I think it's actually really important to be in your community, to be in relationship with the people you're working with, to be grounded. For me as an artist, I think that's actually really important. That it can be very easy, particularly now that I work full-time in university. I think it can be very easy to get detached and sort of get into your own head and turn into perhaps a version of yourself. So for me, what I like about Halifax is I think it's like hard to kind of get too big on yourself in Halifax, first of all.
I don't see.
I don't think you can really set yourself up as like a superstar in Halifax. Like I think it's a very down-to-earth place.
Well, remember, Elle, I am a publicist after all. And one of my big messages to people is that if you're going to sell your work, to some degree, you kind of have to you have to sell yourself. You have to if you're not a fan of your own work, then other people might, that's one approach, of course. To your point, there are different, every artist has a different approach to how they go about promoting their work, sharing it with the world.
Yeah, and actually, I'm actually not a super promoter. Not to say that I don't want things or I don't go after things. I do. But that's just not really my skill set and what I'm interested in, which is another way that it's good to be in Halifax. Like it's small enough that I don't have to compete constantly, be like, if I'm not on Twitter 24/7 and on Instagram, and if I'm not like doing a podcast, if I'm not doing this, then no one's going to know what I'm doing and I can't live and produce things. I think I've been able to kind of do things as I wanted. So I fell into a lot of what I was doing. The Halifax Examiner was just Tim Bousquet, the editor, was going away for like a week and he was just looking for guest writers. And he asked me, do you think you could cover a day? I wrote it. I enjoyed it. I liked the feedback. I was like, I wouldn't mind doing this again.
I'm a big fan of Tim, by the way.
Yeah, and that turned into like 5 years, I think, of weekly writing at the Examiner. But it wasn't until that moment I hadn't said, I'm going to write for the Examiner. People had said you should have a blog, you should, and I was always like, but that's like a lot of work. Yeah.
Well, you know what?
And then here was Tim, and I fell into it, and then people were reading it. So I think it's been a place for me where I'm able to kind of focus on the work I want to do and not have to focus so much on how do I make myself known? How do I compete with other people? How do I get out there? Because this place is small enough, tight enough that you can, if you do good work, I feel like people will see it.
See, you're in line with one of my big messages, and that is the work is the priority. I say this on my website is that everything else is the package around your work, but the work has to stay the priority. Because as soon as the work isn't the priority, if the communication comes before the work, then all of a sudden you're doing work for the sake of promoting it, not doing the work for the sake of creating the thing. And so I think I can see your point
and
there.
that comes
I
from
like that.
spoken word. Like when I started, because that was sort of my first public thing. The public art I was doing was spoken word first. And, I was a little killer. I would, get up on stage and I felt like every time I was on stage, I had to just like lay it down and like really light a fire and just like go hard. Like I always felt that when I was on that stage, I had to earn people's attention. And I had to, and you're always, when you're doing spoken word, you're going up physically in the space with all these amazing poets. So you go and do shows like When Sisters Speak in Toronto and it's like 10 women and everybody's amazing. And so you really have to, be confident in your own voice. Like you can't think about, oh, this person's going to be for me. They're super funny. I'm not funny. Like, like you can't do that. Like you can't compare yourself. But then you have to be really confident in what you're doing and just willing to stand there. But also you have to throw down. Like you like they're elevating. You have to elevate.
I love it. I love that term because I use that too. I say that to people I work with. I say, "Are you going to throw down a track today? Throw it down."
Yeah,
throw it down.
So I always feel like whatever I do, I'm like, if I'm doing poetry, if I'm doing like, you have to perform. So not every piece is going to be your best piece. But you still have to go out there. And I think I've never relented on that, even as I've become, more well-known, right? I guess maybe I could coast a little, but then I'm scared that people will be like, she ain't all that. I went to see her. I heard she was good. She wasn't even good. So, you feel like you have to always, I think, reprove yourself as an artist. And I think that's good. I think it's what keeps you working. You see other people coming up and they're doing great work and you're like, oh, I can't get complacent. So I really like that about, which is the same thing with advocacy too. Like you're always on your toes. So you said at the beginning, what's the relationship? I think they're both creative. I think you really have to know who you are in both spaces. For me as an artist, I always say this about writer's block, that I don't think writer's block is you can't write. You don't know what to write.
I'm so glad you brought that up. One of the questions I was going to sneak in about you was how do you deal with the fear? And that's what
I think it's just being scared and not giving yourself permission to say the things that you want to say. I think it's very rarely that you don't have anything to say. I think it's the blocks around, this isn't as good as my last thing. This isn't as good as whatever this person is doing.
It's not perfect, therefore it's not good enough. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think so. That's very much, so you have to, writing is an encounter with yourself. Like you are staring at a blank screen. There's an audience beyond you, whoever that is. If it's a literal audience in the crowd, if you're writing journalism, people are going to read it. A book you don't even know. It's like, 2 years down the line, someone's going to be reading this thing. And you have to really be confident in your voice to put those words on the page and keep going when you're like, I don't know about this, Like you have to sort of trust that.
I use an approach that I got from Stephen Pressfield's work. It's a snappy little book called The War of Art. Obviously a play on Sun Tzu's Art of War in the title. But the point he was making is that it's not the writing that's hard. It's sitting down to write.
God, yeah.
Exactly.
I'm a very fast writer, but man, I'm the biggest procrastinator.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
But I feel like advocacy is the same. Like you have to really be strong in who you are when you're doing that. You'll get a lot of backlash. You'll get a lot of people that misinterpret you or are interpreting you and just disagree. Like I never read the comments and stuff like that. Like when I do media, I set it and forget it. I don't go and read it. I don't look at it. I don't read what people have to say because, people are going to respond how they want to respond. But I think advocacy is like writing in that too, that you have to say, why am I doing this? I need to be really focused on what my goal is here. And then I can't pay attention to the things that are coming in around me. I have to just focus. So I think they're both kind of the same. They're encounter with yourself. You're taking something out into the world. You have to have a lot of faith and a lot of belief in yourself and in what you're doing. And then you have to kind of let it go. And that's, I think, one way they connect.
Speaking of that, actually, because advocacy, like journalism, you alluded to this, and maybe even disagree with this a little bit, but I find that advocacy, of all the advocates that I've worked with, from a position of that I was a government comms person, so the people who have something to say, I was like I don't want to say gatekeeper, but I was the one receiving the message, and I was the one crafting the message back to them. And working with the people that would actually do the work to respond to whatever it is that they were doing. And so I worked with a lot of advocates. And my picture of it, Elle, is that it seemed that it was always an uphill battle. Would you say that that's a trait of advocacy in general? Or would you think that the uphill battle nature of advocating for change is something that would be more difficult here in, say, Atlantic Canada?
No, I mean, I actually think in some ways it's easier in Atlantic Canada.
Oh, really?
Because again, I think we still have the sort of, if you don't know a person, you know someone who knows them who knows them. So I think people are less willing to just be a total ass to you, to your face here. Like if you're in Toronto, you don't have to see people. So
True. Like you're an
it's
ant.
such a huge community that if you if you confront somebody, they're probably not going to come into contact with you. You can't guarantee that in Nova Scotia. So I think there's a way. In some ways, it's harder because we do have this sort of like the way things work here, where everyone knows and there's can be a bit if you get
we have
iced out, you can
have a tight knit community.
Yeah,
here.
so that can be a bad thing. Obviously, it's like the split side of the small town, right? Where if people take against you or something, it's very easy to kind of ice you out, I guess, personally. But I think in a way, there's more ways for people to listen. I think we have to, in ways, be in more relationship with each other. Like you can't just just be awful to people because they probably know people that you know. So I think
you're probably going to run it. The chances of running into somebody again. I remember when I lived in Montreal during my 20s, and coming from Yarmouth and Fredericton when I went to school. It was a huge culture shock for me. It was beautiful. I loved it. But what you just described is what I experienced. It was like for the first time, I was completely anonymous. I was if I wanted to go get something to eat, not everybody knew that I went and got that Subway sandwich. Do you know what I mean?
And you can take advantage in that in advocacy because it is a lot of it is making people feel like they have to do something. And so if they think they might have to run into you at 20 more meetings, that's maybe a bit different. So I think that's a positive. I think it's also, again, it's easier to kind of have a network. Like I find advocacy, I would say it's listening mostly. Like a lot of it is just hearing people's stories.
That's huge.
That's where it starts. I mean, even the sort of biggest things I've done, like fighting Abdul Abdi's deportation, fighting wrongful convictions, they start with just listening to what someone's telling you. Then it's not taking no for an answer. So you just have to really keep going and keep pushing and keep asking. And it's a lot of relationship building. So it's a lot of calling up a lawyer and getting them to do the work for free because you don't have money and the person doesn't have money.
It's interesting.
Talking to a social worker and figuring out how the thing works, So.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I'm not allowed to talk about it because in my post, I was working for the government. But it's interesting. I was actually the comms person who worked on the other end of that.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to talk about it because obviously confidentiality and whatnot, even though I don't work there anymore. But I'm just saying is yes, that was an interesting time and what a case.
That was a big, and that is so instructive for us in so many ways in terms of what we were doing. Some of it we accidentally fell into in that we didn't take a meeting with a government official through that entire campaign. So people don't know what I'm talking about. This was just a deportation case we were fighting. A young man that came as a refugee from Somalia with his sister. Yep. They were taken into permanent care and they did not get citizenship, even though they should have been entitled to it. So when he was 19, he was incarcerated and they scheduled him for deportation to Somalia, where he had actually never lived. He had been born in a refugee camp. He didn't speak the language, didn't have any family. There was no way for him to survive. And so because of the fact that he was a refugee in care, we were fighting the case based on that. The government had a responsibility.
If you hadn't have had that campaign, if that campaign didn't exist, he would have had, besides for his mother and his family, he would have had literally zero support.
Well, his sister was, Fatuma was actually she was the one that found our lawyer, Ben Perryman, at the time. Okay. So she had been fighting for him. And then we heard about the case and stepped in. And that became this national advocacy. But my point being on that is that that was all done in public. There was not a single private meeting, a single closed door meeting. And there was points where it's just we didn't get the people we wanted. So I was like, I don't want to meet with that person. Yeah. I at the time would have met with, for example, the Minister of Public Safety. We just never got that meeting. But that actually worked out because it meant that the whole campaign was a pressure campaign of public advocacy. It really brought people in. There was no bargaining behind doors. So I think that was a really strong ethical position. It taught us a lot about just, again, how to kind of go hard. We did not relent in that campaign. As you know, we were at politicians' offices. Yes. We were at every event. There was just not a moment where we were letting up on this.
Well, actually, you know what? That's interesting, Elle, because that leads me into the next question about process. Because what you're describing is very similar to how an artist would go about like campaigning with a goal, with an objective, is very similar to, say, opening up that blank document, starting with a goal, and pushing towards it.
Yeah, we believed the whole time. We believed we could win. We had absolute faith that we could win. We we had complete faith in Ben Perriman, who's like an amazing lawyer and was working pro bono and just really went out of his way. And people said, oh, well, you can't take an immigration case to court. And he did, and we won that. But it was also, we had talks with each other. We said things like, how far are we going to go? If we have to drain our bank accounts, would we do that? And we looked at each other and we said, yes. Like if we have to lie down on the runway in front of a plane, is that something we're willing to do? And that was a yes.
There's another similarity to the artist, the sacrifice.
Yeah.
The sacrifice you have to make to get what you want when there are stakes attached, when the road is difficult and the world is going to throw everything at it. What are you willing to do to get what you want?
And it's one of those things where I would say it wasn't like, it's not that it's hard, but it's easy in the sense of once you're clear on what you want to do, it's not difficult in the sense of you're not conflicted. We knew where we wanted to go. We knew what we needed to do. We knew it was going to be 24/7. We knew we were going to have to go out in public. We knew we were going to get backlash. We knew people were going to hate us for doing what we had to do. And we knew we could win. And once you're just clear on that, then you're going to do difficult things. It's not that anybody loves standing up in that room in front of people and confronting a politician and, people booing and hissing at you. Nobody loves that. I think sometimes people think that, they just love waving the signs. They like attention. It's hard. It's your own community. You don't like it. I don't like when people have an impression of me where they just hate me. People said horrible things about me and they have the right to. I'm not going to police that, but I'm saying, obviously, in a perfect world, everyone would love me, They don't. And you have to take that on.
At the same time, though, Elle, there is a flip side to the coin. Is that you're while you're going to have detractors, if you will, for lack of a better word, you're also going to have people who really appreciate what you're doing. People on your side.
Oh yeah, of course. But I'm just saying. So those things are difficult. Like,
yes,
you get very nervous before you do the stuff. Like you can feel very exposed, all that. But it's easy in the sense of you're very clear. And I think writing, once you know what you're doing, for example, like. Writing is hard when you don't know what you're doing. When you're like, oh God, what's my next book?
Writing's a lot harder than people think.
Yeah, like what's my next book going to be on? I don't even know. But once you know it, it's a lot of work. You have to put all the pieces together. You have to do it, but you know where you're going. And I feel like that's the same thing. Like once you set your mind on the thing and you know what the steps are and you know what the outcome is, there's going to be a lot of really difficult things that happen. But I feel like in that way, the path is clear. So that's where I feel, that's how we've done effective advocacy, is just being really clear with each other about what the sacrifice is, being really clear with each other around kind of what we expect. And also we've known and trusted each other a lot. And being able from that kind of love and relationship to do the things that we've done and win. So
one last question for you before we move on to the next section. I just want to know, you touched on writing. My stance is that communication is a lot harder than people think. It's easy to, as you said before, go on and start, sending tweets or whatever, or writing a post or responding to something. That's easy to do. You just sit down at your computer, you do it, maybe impulsively. But what's hard is communicating well. My stance is that in order to communicate well, what you need to do is you need to write. You need to get the thoughts out of your head and onto paper, making them real so you can realize what you're saying. It's like a defense against impulsivity. What do you think of that? What do you think of the idea of good writing being a staple for doing literally anything that's hard to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, you also have to be very clear in your thinking if you want to write well, and that can seem obvious, but perhaps not.
Doesn't seem it to me.
Your thoughts have to be clear. You have to, and that means you have to engage in a lot of critical thinking. I'm very good friends with Desmond Cole. He's one of my best friends. You might know about him. Journalist. He wrote "What the Skin We're In."
I've not met him.
So we talk all the time, and like we'll have hours-long conversations where we're bouncing ideas off each other, clarifying what we think, arguing back and forth. And that's an important part of my writing and thinking practice. That somebody that understands how you think, but is going to challenge that. Desmond has edited pieces of mine where he's been like, "That's not worthy of you here." Like you don't need to attribute something to the person. Like don't. Like where he'll critique what you're doing in the piece to make it stronger. So I think you really have to have a practice of being really clear on what and how you think in order to write clearly. I think you have to have a clear sense of whatever issues you're talking about. And this is tied to advocacy. Because I always say with advocacy, like you just have to learn on your feet. Like, oh, now you have to learn immigration law in a day. So you're just going to do it. Like I just feel so many times when I'm doing something, I've had to get up to speed on child custody or family law or what the immigration rules are or whatever it is. Like,
there's a lot of that.
How does housing work? How do you access benefits? Whatever it is, because people are coming to you and you have to just figure out how to do it.
It's a mess too. Even most of the work I used to do on the other side of advocacy, I suppose, because you advocate to government, I suppose. But I'm just realizing this moment. But yeah, it's complicated. It's not easy to go. It's one thing to be told, okay, just go on the internet and sign up for the thing or do the thing or find the information there. It's another thing to wade through that mess of regulations,
Right.
all of the different things to input. You don't, navigate.
Which is where listening comes in, because say, had I known you at the time, I'd have probably called you and said, off the books, how does this work at the government? Because not one person can get up to speed and all that. So that's where, when you have the Rolodex, you're like, let me call up the social worker I know and have them talk me through how this works. I'm going to talk to this lawyer friend I have, and I'm just going to ask them my questions. And this is where listening comes in and people's willingness to give you time. And I think people give that time because they see that you're willing to give your time in return. Like, it's not a one way where I'm like, give me things. They see that you're working hard and they're willing to also be part of that. But I say that, like, I think writing is the same way. Like, you have to be very clear in yourself. You have to be very, like, it's like having a path. I would say spoken word is almost like, I also call them like rhymed maps. You know what I mean? Like you have to sort of know, I'm going from here to here to here in this way. This is how they're connected.
You have a plan. You have a plan even when you're doing, even when you're writing an email. You have to plan and design what that's going to look like. You want it to be effective.
And you have to hear it. That. At least I do. Like the rhythm of your writing, what sounds good. You have to read it back over. I'm obviously tend towards long sentences, so I got to chop them up, put in some punctuation, take out some complex punctuation, but it's
here you are,
all
and you see that there you go. You are an artist and that you are a poet. So constructing a poem, that there's no way that doesn't help you construct any piece of writing.
Yeah, and it has to feel right. So with spoken word, you can't kind of gloss it because sometimes when you're doing a piece of particularly academic writing, there can be sections like, whatever, I can get away with it.
Yeah, we used to call that the stuff you have to put in.
Yeah, or just something where you're like, it's a bit shaky, but maybe no one will notice, But you can't really have that with spoken word because you got to get up on stage and say it. So if you're not committed to it and you feel like it's stupid, it's going to be hard to get up in front of an audience and say it. So I feel like you have to be very committed to what you're saying in spoken word. You have to mean what you say and say what you mean, because you're going to have to own those words because they're coming right out of your mouth. So you can't really sort of be, it wasn't really me, So I think that taught me a lot about clarity. Just being able, you have to speak directly to an audience. People don't listen. If you don't know 30 seconds in what the person's saying, you're going to tune out. You have to be very direct when you're speaking orally. People can't follow a really complex poem, because what people are going to remember. So all of those things were things that taught me through oral. So then when I started doing journalism or doing other forms of writing, I could bring that in, and also sensing your audience. You have to, there's an emotional flow to a show, right? You can't come off the top with
Absolutely, there is. It's called. I call that hooking the audience. Yeah. You want them to be engaged, and if you're, if my trick to that is that if I'm ever talking to, or when I'm doing YouTube stuff, I'm talking to an individual, not a group. And that way I'll sound like I'm talking to you. I'll sound like the chances of me in their psyche connecting with them and having them be engaged increase 100-fold if you're talking to an individual and not talking like you're doing a Shakespeare play and you're projecting to a wide audience.
Yeah, and it's a journey too, right? If you're doing a set, you're taking people on an emotional journey from here to here to here. So the different parts, when you have people enough to do this difficult thing that's more challenging, so you have to think about that. If you come with a poem that's just going to alienate people as your first poem, then they're done for the set. You can get people with that poem later in the set where they're already on board with you, and now you do a thing where they're a bit challenged, but they like you, so they're willing to go. And so it's the same thing, I think, with journalism, there's a narrative, there's an emotional flow that people go through when they read a piece. And you have to kind of understand that. And I think having that sense of audience, I learned that from spoken word, and I actually apply it in my teaching and advocacy.
Absolutely do. And I think that's the point we're making here today. That's the reason I called you here, is because as someone who is an artist, an advocate, a journalist, and a teacher, those are four things that they all have very similar process in that you are communicating and presenting a message, keeping the audience engaged, and often for a purpose with stakes attached. And I think that's why I wanted to talk to you so much. I'll tell you what though, Elle, let's take a very, very quick break so I can put up an ad or something.
Perfect.
And we'll be right back right after this. Hey everybody. This that you're listening to right now is available in both podcast and video. So if you'd rather watch or you'd rather listen, go to glenfriel.com. Podcast, video, blog, it's all there. And thank you so much for the support out of the gate. I want to switch gears for a sec here. Before I ask you a couple of questions that I want to that are literally for people, but we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to switch gears and I want to ask you about journalism. Now, in Nova Scotia and in Atlantic Canada recently, I don't think I have to say any examples. I think people know what's going on in terms of that. But it just feels to me like our local outlets, our local journalism, I kind of feel like it's dying.
Well, it's being killed. So, and this is the model, of course, because newspapers, traditional news is struggling, right? With the move to like social media, TikTok, YouTube, whatever. So obviously people aren't physically buying the paper, and that has challenged traditional news. And so the model has been to basically centralize the news, aka in Toronto, and then cut the local reporting. But this is why, who reports on city hall meetings? Who reports on police board, for example, which is an incredibly important, like that's where the budgeting for the police takes place. A lot of us, I started going to those meetings like on purpose because we weren't attending them. And how do you even begin to like hold the police accountable if none of us are even witnessing what's happening? Like you have to know what's going on. Most people are at work and stuff when city council is taking place. So you rely on reporting to tell you that. So people, obviously we get very focused on things like federal politics, what we're told are the big issues. But of course, what's impacting us is what's happening. We don't even have a school board anymore, but at the level of school board, at the level of police board, city council, this local meeting, that meeting. And that's what local journalism is supposed to cover. And when you don't have that, first of all, you have no idea what's going on. They're sneaking all kinds of things through. It's extremely undemocratic. Not because our city council in particular, I'm just saying it becomes undemocratic because there's nobody watching. And so who knows what's being passed? Who's there to know that this kind of thing on housing is being passed in this development that is going to affect this thing here, unless people are there to cover it. And then people say, wait a minute, no, that can't happen because of XYZ issue, right? We always need to be here to challenge. So it's very, very concerning in terms of what we know about our community, how we democratically engage our community, how we hold people in power accountable, the power we have to advocate, which is based on knowledge and information. So, and then even in terms of what journalism means to communities, like beyond all of that, I just think that, like there's so much storytelling that takes place in communities. So even just the little local stories about, this kid won a science fair and this person, like that's actually really important news.
It is, because you know why? Because if you get your news wholesale from Central Canada, say, or wherever it comes from, or from places, or from the States, exactly, or increasingly from the UK, or anywhere in Europe. What it means is that it's great to know what's going on in the world. That's wonderful, but it means that we don't have the voice doesn't come from here. The eyes and ears aren't here, and that means that anything that happens here is, to your point, literally not getting seen, literally not getting heard, and therefore can't be thought about.
And then if you think of, like people that come from, you're from Yarmouth, like how often are you going to hear a Yarmouth voice on like national news? You're not. You don't hear
virtually never.
Yeah, you're not going to hear like accents that come out of Atlantic Canada that sound like, a real like Cape Breton accent, So what does that say to people who live here about who they are to Canada? It marginalizes people, right? Like if you're not seeing your own community and people that come from your background, if everybody that's now making news and not just speaking it, but writing it, choosing stories. If everybody went to, 3 Ontario universities for journalism, and they all come from the same Southern Ontario background. I'm not bashing on Toronto here or Ontario, but I'm just saying if they all come from that same background, the same class background, the same urban, etc. background, it's completely narrowing what the experience is, what kind of reflections there are, what representation there is. And that's not going to be the same as somebody who lives in Yarmouth or Digby or North Preston or wherever, right? So it's actually really important that we are able to generate news, stories, and voices in our own communities. Which goes back to what I said about art, right? Like I would not be the artist that I am without being within the communities I'm within. The African Nova Scotian community fundamentally formed what I do in my art, how I talk, what I talk about, what my content is, how I think about archiving it, like what audience I think about. That is all fundamentally formed by a specific community that comes out of Nova Scotia. And when people are responding to what I'm doing, that's what they're responding to. When I'm going internationally and doing poems or speaking and people are saying, oh, like that perspective you took is different, it's because it's not different here. It's informed by a set of voices that you don't normally get to see and a set of experiences. So
I couldn't agree with you more on that because it's like I say, I spent I have a kind of a weird history in Nova Scotia. During the pandemic, they were short on substitute teachers, and I have a lot of teacher friends, and so I was setting up my practice and everything, and of course during the pandemic, who wants to consult with somebody about their art? They got other things in mind, that sort of thing, and I wasn't established, so I signed up to be a permit teacher. I did that for about 4 months straight. I went to about 16 different schools, and I was teaching elementary school kids. What's interesting about visiting and teaching elementary school kids in 16 different schools all around the county, as far out as Sheet Harbor, I taught in Dartmouth, Sackville, Bedford, Halifax proper. A lot in Dartmouth though, because where I live, it was easy to get there. I just jump on the Magazine Hill, and then I'm there. And they didn't, and there were less people who were available in the Dartmouth area than there were in Halifax. Just how it turned out to be. But what I got to see, was I got to see who are the kids fans of? Who are they talking about? Who are their heroes? Who are they? What posters do they have in their lockers, so to speak? The little kids didn't have lockers per se, but they had their space and everything. They had their desk and everything like that. And it's interesting because to your point, they're not. They're all people. They're all the big stars and stuff like that. That's who they talk about. They're all a lot of them. A lot of people into hockey. A lot of people into soccer now. They were all big fans of Messi and everything like that. But I mean, very very rarely, every now and then you'd get somebody who had a Wanderers shirt on. Do you know what I mean? Your local team, your local flavor. That was an interesting time, Elle. But it speaks to your point about if these kids aren't exposed to the stories that come from here, from voices who sound like theirs, then what does that mean for their development?
And then it suggests that, again, like you can't be successful and be here. So if you want to be successful, you need to go somewhere else. And then that's where we get people moving away because they're like, well, I can't be an artist. I can't make my career. I can't do these things from here. So it is a cycle, right? It self-fulfills that if we don't have voices and funding and art and journalism and stuff here, then people are like, well, if I'm an artist, what coverage am I going to get if we don't have an arts paper? So I might as well go to a bigger market where I can try and get an agent, So yeah, it's very destructive.
It's also very ironic.
Yeah.
The irony is that with the technology there is today, with the developments in communication technology, like this, what we're doing here, for instance. I mean, I have a couple of mics. I have my computer. I have an internet connection, and in theory, I could broadcast this to anybody I wanted on platforms that you can just post stuff. I'm just saying, is the irony, Elle, is that whereas there's still this lingering attitude in places like among youth, perhaps because of what they're not seeing or what they are seeing, that you have to go elsewhere. You have to go to the big cities to do well. But you could produce, and nowadays the kind of work that people look at can be made anywhere and broadcast from anywhere.
And obviously I'm not against traveling. I think we should open our minds. I think we should take opportunities. But I just mean when it becomes not a choice, but an imperative, that's the difference, right? Like when it's not, I'm going here because I want to expand my mind, I want to try this out, but I can also come work here. When it becomes impossible to do your work in the place you're from, then I think we should question it. So.
I think I've read recently that Nova Scotia. I think the pandemic had something to do with it, but I think that I read recently that Nova Scotia has specifically has recently um, crossed the million mark.
So yeah.
There are more people who live here than ever before. Buildings are going up quickly, like you see on the skylines of Montreal, Toronto, that kind of thing. And it's encouraging for me because it means that we're growing. It means that there's an interest in this place. It means the profile of this place is growing. At least it seems that way, perception wise. What do you think of that? What do you think of the idea that Atlantic Canada is? It seems to be, at least to me, and you might disagree with this, but it seems to be a more of a choice, more of an option now than it's ever been before.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that depends on can the people that are from here still live, because the problem, obviously, like, there's nothing, we want people to come in, that's great.
Mm.
But if the buildings going up aren't meaning that people that are working minimum wage can find housing, like if we're not building that, that's the problem, right? So sometimes the problem, especially in smaller places, because we got these stories during the pandemic where it'd be like, again, I feel like I'm just like bashing Toronto, but they were Toronto stories.
Hey, we have to build this place up.
Like,
and they get lots.
But
of
the
attention,
stories of like, these people are leaving Toronto in COVID, and with their $400,000, they can buy like XYZ in Nova Scotia, and it's like,
No.
but isn't that going to drive up the value? So now we in Nova Scotia. So I'm not trying to do a xenophobic thing here. It's like only Nova Scotia for Nova Scotia. I mean that we have to make sure we're taking care of everybody. So does growth mean growth of the people that can live in the condos, or does growth mean when your grandmother is housed correctly and when your children are able to have a job and have shelter and have the things they need? So I see growth as when we grow more in how many of us are able to live safely. That's what growth is to me. And then that also means, as we bring in more people that, Nova Scotia is way more diverse than it used to be,
Yeah, I think
there's so many different cultures. You used to go in the farm food aisle at Sobeys and it would be like tacos, and like fortune cookies. And now there's like actual food, like you can actually get things. So there's definitely been a huge expansion of diversity in different cultures.
I know exactly what you're saying because, like I say, in my 20s when I lived in Montreal, I was spoiled by the diversity of not only people and culture, which was great from Yarmouth, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden I'm in Montreal and there's people from all over the world. I'm working with a guy from Bangladesh, or I'm working with a guy from literally anywhere. I'm just saying is that and now it seems like Halifax, where I live now, but even grocery stores in Fredericton, Atlantic Canada, it seems like you're right. They're kind of jumping on that. They kind of have. There's a lot more choice now. It's like we've caught up to that.
Yeah.
It's like there's nothing that. My point is, is there's nothing you can't do in Halifax on a day-to-day basis that you can't get at a grocery store in Toronto or Montreal. I'm sure there's exceptions, obviously, but I'm saying is it seems, to your point, I think it seems like we're moving right along, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, people used to have this kind of idea like we're 50 years behind. That used to be Nova Scotia is so
We're
backwards.
pumping water out of the ground. Yeah, that's it.
But no, I think it's actually a good balance. It depends who you are. I mean, as somebody, I like running, so I like that I can head out my door and go to the park and do whatever, I like that, you don't have to be super, like you can still chill out in Nova Scotia.
Yeah,
you can have your career and you don't have to be working 24/7. Like there's still like leisure,
I think this is a great place to raise children.
So I think like I always feel like you can do what you want here. And you can make the moves you need to move. So if you want to have an international audience, you can get online. You can make the right connections, but you also are able to kind of live the kind of private life you want to. And so I'm a fan of letting down your bucket where you are, to quote Langston Hughes. I think that, make a place where you are. I think that, I think in many ways it's richer. Like there's other people in other places that are their places. Why not make your place and be yourself in your place?
I think this is a great place to do that too. And coming back to the artists, I think this is a wonderful setting. Okay, say you lived in Toronto. We'll go back to Toronto. Say you lived in Toronto for your whole life.
It's like the Toronto hate hour.
No. This is and you know what? The fact that you keep saying that says something about you. I think it says something good about you. I think it's like no, we love everybody, and we do, because we in Atlantic Canada we have a reputation of being very welcoming. I think that speaks to that. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of people who worked these we'll say big city careers, for lack of a better term. And then when they retire, they go somewhere like they might go to Lunenburg, and where it's very picturesque, very very peaceful, and then they might start painting, or maybe they're doing some other kind of, maybe they're doing an art that was similar to a trade they might have done. I'm just saying is this is a beautiful setting for an artist to be able to focus. A lot of inspiration here.
And a huge part of writing is internal, especially when you're between projects. So like I'm now like, I mean, I have my academic research stuff, but in terms of thinking of my next like book that's not academic, I'm not there. I don't know. It took me 10 years on the last one. So, I guess I still have a lot of time. But, you need that space to sort of think about what you're doing. How do my ideas fit together? Like writing is a lot of space to think as well. And especially if you want to progress as a writer, like if you don't want to say, like, we can all sort of do the same thing that we do really well, and you can do that over and over again, and you can produce that. If you want to progress as an artist, there needs to be breaks, because you need to be taking in new ideas. You need to be seeing different things, meeting different people, learning to think differently. And as we get older, I think that's part of the challenge as an artist, that, when you're young, like everything's new, everything's fresh.
Yeah.
You come in and you're a fresh voice. And, as you get older, you have to challenge yourself more to learn things, like you sort of think you know everything, and you have to challenge your mind more and like be open to ideas and not sort of get in the groove of, I know what I know. And I think that becomes more challenging, like just by nature, like as our lives, we have more responsibilities, jobs, whatever, and also literally biologically how our brains work. So you need a lot of space and time, and you need new voices, and you need to be able to listen to things and try out different things. And I think here, it's like a good, like you have that time to relax. Like I don't feel like, I don't have like some agent knocking on my door and being like, where's your next book? You have 6 months. It's got to be out. There's 500 other people, like my publisher, when I'm ready to give them stuff, which is Fernwood Press, then they'll be ready to edit it, So I think same with Examiner. I could just write whatever. I don't think there was any other newspaper in the world that I could move from, I don't know, snarking on people one week to writing like a 10,000 word essay on people in prison the next week, to doing a personal essay on myself and my mom the next week, and then doing news items the next week. Like I could do whatever I wanted on the Examiner. It could be funny. It could be personal. It could be news. It could be like reporting. It could be investigative. It could be opinion. And Tim just gave me the space, and it could be as many words as I wanted. Like there was no word count,
I remember when Tim started the Examiner. I was at Department of Education at the time. I remember talking to him on the phone, and we were talking about, I think, if memory serves, and he might remember this actually. If memory serves, we were talking about the format. He was trying to play with the format because he wanted to go online. He wanted to have an online platform. And he wanted to do the model his way, and and by and large, I would say that he was successful in doing that.
Yeah, and for me, so when I started, I was doing like Morning File, which is you just find news and you explain the item, so you have your own take. And I would usually try to be funny, so try to be funny. So like at first, sort of first year, if you look back, it's sort of 4 or 5 items, and I'd be like looking at a news story and breaking it down, which is when I was like terrorizing people. I think people were really scared of me because that was when I would just go in on things, and then I think it was just, there's some week where there wasn't a lot of news, and I just sort of on a whim said, oh, I'll write about whatever it was, some historical event or something. And then that expanded my writing. And then, there's a week where I couldn't think of anything to do, so I wrote something personal. And that actually really pushed my writing. A lot of the stuff, so like a lot of my book, a lot of that writing started in the Examiner. But even just pushing how I write nonfiction, it was because I got to experiment in this space in the Examiner.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's great because, because I like the idea of practicing more and publishing it for real to get the experience of doing that, because that's only going to translate to anything, especially a bigger work, like say you take on a book. All that stuff you do is only going to help that.
Yeah, and you have to really, like find like what voice you're comfortable with. Like sometimes you have to fight. Like sometimes when you're writing and you fall into like this kind of voice that's annoying, you're like, why am I writing in this way? And you're trying to like undo it and take it out, but you have to really, the voice that can talk to the audience, that can bring people along.
You're not going to recognize that unless you do it.
No, you have to practice. And so I got like 5 years of weekly practice of all different kinds of nonfiction writing. But I don't think that would have taken place in another format. Like they would have said, no, this is getting clicks and that isn't. So don't do the thing over here that gets no clicks. We want you to do this. Can you write on this thing you write on like Beyonce? Because people will read that, like page count is usually really important for people, like how many clicks, what's getting readership, and you're pushed in that direction. Whereas with the Examiner, it was anything goes. And I don't know that has existed or would exist in another place where you can just be sort of handed a page and do whatever you want with it. So that's an example of something that exists here that is intensely local. And it used to annoy me because I felt like I said this right at the beginning. I felt like I was writing these stories that people would come 2 years later. I'd be like, I wrote that in the Examiner in like 2015. Like, what do you mean? And then people would not have read what I wrote. And I'd be like, literally, you're talking to me about this thing, and I was the one that wrote it.
There's a lot of that going on, though, Elle.
So people don't pay attention to what we're doing here.
Well, and on the flip side of it, too, there's a lot of people who are commenting on stuff without even reading the thing.
Oh yeah, well,
that's all. You're always going to get that. To your point, Elle, I have a question for you. You were talking about voice. You were talking about the writing process. I'm curious. Do you do audio versions?
No. So I mean, it's funny with poetry because I was supposed to do an audiobook and then I just never recorded it. So eventually they got someone else. Which is funny. And the reason I'm laughing is because I actually very much feel with poetry, it's supposed to be oral. Like I actually am iffy on when my spoken word is written down. It's supposed to be heard. It's written to be heard. I feel like it on the page, it doesn't necessarily look. And people have said this to me too, that if they've heard me say it when they read the poem, they can hear it. But if they read it by themselves and they hear me do it, sometimes it's completely different. So I actually what I like about oral work, I actually really like the in the moment performance of spoken word. And I know the flip side of that is obviously we're supposed to archive and, Black work isn't often archived and we need to be attentive to what survives history and what gets written down and what gets recorded and what gets preserved. But I actually like the non-preserving of the oral performance. I like that it happens in a moment. That people have their own memory of it, which can be completely not even reality, but you construct your own moment with it. There's been poems I've done that on the page aren't very good poems, but in the moment, I remember when we were doing stuff outside St. Pat's. So when they were, trying to demolish St. Pat's or sell St. Pat's in the community. And I remember doing a poem about St. Pat's and Rocky Jones was holding the megaphone and people remember that poem. Now, that was not a good poem as such. In terms of is that a poem that would survive the test of time and you would teach in English class? No. But in the moment, it spoke to the crowd. The people in that moment felt it. There was an energy to it. It was on the steps. Rocky was there. And people remember that poem. And sometimes they ask me for that poem. I'm like, it's a bad poem. But in the moment, and that's what I really like about oral work, that it takes on its own moment and then it goes away.
Well,
and you don't hold it.
You're also, that's a good example too of you're attaching the art with the advocacy.
Yeah.
Because it has a purpose. There's an objective with stakes attached to it. And so take it out of that context.
Yeah. When I was poet laureate, you get invited to do, it'd be things like awards for kids. And I would write these little poems where I just put their names in the poem and the kids would love it, and I was just rhyming off names like Ben is a 10, but the kid would be like, oh, my name's in that poem. And you realize that so much, it's really important to be seen. It's really important that people feel significant and recognized. I'm lucky as a artist that I have a career where people recognize me. I get up and I say things and people clap,
I think it's good to emit the confidence. I think people pick up on that. I think if you're confident in delivering your art or even confident in making your art, I think that comes out in the product. Yeah, exactly. The idea is that if you love what you do, that's going to come out. People are going to pick up on that.
You have to mean it. And you have to be able to enter back. So every time you say a poem, if I don't feel that poem anymore, I can't perform it. You have to be able to feel what was in that poem, emotionally, politically, intellectually, whatever it was. You have to be able to, and it's kind of interesting sometimes because you're entering something that you wrote 10 years ago and you're different now. And then it's like a little snapshot of yourself, in your early 20s or whatever, you're like, oh, okay, I used to talk about that, So it's funny in that way. But I think, on stage, you have to sell it. And the way you have to sell it is you have to mean it, at least for my work. But just to say that in doing that, I realize people want to be seen. They want their stories to be heard. They want to feel significant. People need to feel important. You need to feel like you can actually make a difference in this world in whatever way.
And if you don't believe that, if you don't believe you can make a difference, then that's the first step to not making a difference.
Yeah, or feeling powerless or becoming bitter or
you definitely
not engaging.
You definitely don't want to get bitter because it leads to stuff. Because bitterness leads, to me, bitterness is a big first step towards becoming maybe even depressed. And we know that's bad for people.
Well, I mean, I think we all fight that. And I'm an artist. I'm sensitive, like I mean, you're sitting here, like, oh, you're successful. I don't always feel successful. There's things I
No,
feel.
I know what you're saying. I
Like,
feel the same way. I'm either, because if I'm setting out to make a piece and I'm not hitting it, if it's not where I want it to be, I don't feel successful in that moment.
well, yeah, and there's always going to be other people that have an award that you wanted, or have more attention than you have. Um, got the thing you wanted to get. There's always going to be that. I think if you haven't written something in a while, so you were like, "Oh, you still doing journalism?" Like, I need to get back to it. So then you feel that, like, am I still a writer if I'm not writing this thing? I think you feel very down on yourself if you're not writing, or not writing in the way you want to be writing. You feel a lot of pressure around producing work. And I feel all those things. I feel resentful. I, feel like, why don't I have this recognition? I feel like I deserve that. I feel those things all the time. But you have to fight through them. Like, that can't, if you just make that your thing, like, I'm going to be resentful, I'm going to be mad that this person has things, like, you can't live there. You can feel that and acknowledge that you have that feeling. Those people are complex. We have jealousies. We have egos. Those are all real, and we don't need to pretend they're not there. But we have to find ways to do what we need to do despite that. I feel that with advocacy too. There's a lot of times where I feel like, why do all these people, like, why am I not getting this thing? Like, why does everybody have this award and this thing and that? And I'm here grinding it out, and I'm just expected to do the work, and I don't seem to get anything back. I feel that all the time.
I kind of feel that way about fear.
Do you?
That's how I feel about my fear. It's like, what am I afraid of? Like a stage fright, for instance. It's like there's that, again, I'll go back to my Stephen Pressfield, but it's that repulsion coming from my desk, sitting down from it, and I feel that's how, like, dealing with that. I feel I deal with fear that way. But like, the point is, is you always have it. Like, you can't get rid of your fear, but you can face your fear. But you have to realize, or not you, but you know what I mean.
No,
I have to get used to this moment.
Me.
Yeah. But you're who I'm looking for advice on this, actually. But it's like, well, I guess I'll just ask you the question. When it comes to writing a piece, when there are stakes attached, when there are people who are depending on that, whether directly or indirectly, how do you face that? What strategy?
I actually do really well in those scenarios. I'm a pressure writer, so the tighter the deadline, which I often artificially construct because I'm a procrastinator, so it's like, oh my God, I have half an hour to do this thing. I'm actually better when I have to pull it off, because then I feel like it clarifies. You don't have a lot of time to mess around. So, and when you have a long time, you sort of are like, should I do this or this? Should I do this? I think, like, when you have an hour and then the thing's got to be in, then it's like, I'm just going with the thing I wrote down. So I actually find that, for me, pressure can clarify.
Helps you cross the finish line.
But I hate to talk about, I always feel like when you talk about running, you're annoying because people are like, stop talking about running. But I'm going to talk about running, which actually taught me a lot, because this is running. You're never going to be the fastest person. There's always people that are faster than you, and you have to go to workouts and get your ass kicked by people, and you're going to be kicking other people's asses. And sometimes those same people kick your ass next week, right? And so you have to really center it in yourself. Like,
talk about running. I actually one of the questions I was going to sneak in here was actually about
like hobbies.
Well, I train.
Yeah.
I train just for the kicks of it. Like I want to stay healthy. I want to be healthy for my daughter, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so, but when I'm at the gym, there's always going to be that guy with the big muscles and stuff. I'm never going to get there. You know what I mean? But I see your point is my point.
Yeah, and like, so you have to shut down comparison with yourself.
Yes.
You have to shut down comparison with other people. You have to focus on what you need to do today, and sometimes that's going to go badly. And you have to really support other people. So I got injured. I wasn't able to run the marathon I wanted to run.
Oh.
And I had, in my room, I was crying, but I was very committed to the idea that, I'm going to, now the thing I can do is support my teammate through this. And running actually really taught me that. So I think running actually, because we run in a team, that actually helped me with some of like my writing and life resentments, because it actually taught me to congratulate more and praise more and be happy for other people, and that other people's accomplishments don't actually diminish your own. And, like, you actually, when you cheer on somebody and when you support somebody and when you give that, like, people will notice that and remember that. And that's actually a really important lesson. So I think it's just important to sort of take that breath around the pressures and the narratives that you have for yourself. So narratives of failure, narratives of recognition, narratives of not good enough, whatever that is. I think you really have to sort of acknowledge it there, and then you gotta push them. You gotta get rid of them, because all you can do is the thing you're doing in this moment. You can only write the piece you're writing now. And there's always a million versions of that piece that would happen if you wrote it on a different day or at a different time. If I wrote my book at a different time, now would I have selected different pieces to be in there? Maybe. So it's not ever going to be the perfect work. It's just the work that you can give now. And I think you just have to really accept that with writing, that I'm going to give what I can give now. I'm going to give my effort into it. People are going to receive it as they receive it. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. Some people aren't going to read it. Some people are going to read it and misinterpret it. Some people are going to interpret it right and still hate it. And that's okay.
I see that. You know what? I see that with content creators online, like I am aspiring to be. One of the things that was very similar to what you're describing is that you see the statistics of not only how many views you get. That's what people generally associate success with in terms of that. I don't. I know I'm talking to a niche market. I'm talking to Atlantic Canadians, and Atlantic Canadians artists, advocates, business self-starters. But the point, Elle, is that the stats will tell me, that the analytics will tell me how many people only watched the first 2 minutes of my video and then gave up on it. But I'm never going to know why that was. Maybe they were going. Maybe they're coming back to it later.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or maybe, and I see this as a good thing, actually. I like you, I don't really have an issue with this now. But if they're not interested in it and it's not for them, that's fine with me. I had to get there, though. I had to get there. At first everybody was telling me that, okay, this is really bad news. You've got work to do. You got to fix it. It's wrong. You know what I mean? But that I wasn't getting into my place of, I want to make the material I want to make, and I want to make it as good as I can. And I still want to keep laser focused on who my audience is and how I can help them. So I kind of had to put that away a little bit.
Yeah, and also because you have to be able to take critique, right? And I think if we build up narratives around critique, then we become unable to take it. Because there's always illegitimate critique, right? There's always the people that are just gonna, like, I just whack myself in the face of the mic. Someone's gonna comment in the comments, someone's gonna say you look ugly or whatever, and that's like, you don't have to worry about that critique. But you can't let the existence of that critique make you unable to hear the critique that's good. That's like, it would be better if you spoke slow. I mean, people tell me that. It would be better if you spoke slower. Sorry, guys, that ship has sailed, But, or, like, I'd have liked if you said more. Like, that is actually good critique. Not all critique is coming from a place of like, and I think we're very sensitive now to criticism, because we get so much, like, we can't even live online without people just shoving their oar in and saying all kinds of terrible things.
I like your advice earlier about that, about you don't read comments.
Yeah, I don't read, like, if I do media or something, I don't go back and listen to it. I don't read what people have to say. And it's not my job to police people, and it's okay if they don't like it.
I have to check the comments because I have to look for,
because you have to see, yeah.
Well, whereas there's an aspect of mentorship in what I'm doing, like I'm trying to purvey how to do something. I'm checking the comments for questions, but
it used to,
I can skip by those nasty things.
It used to really bother me if, like, people didn't like me, But I think that's especially as a woman, like, it's very, and I suppose that surprises people, because people often are like, you don't give a fuck, And I'm like, I do. I just don't care enough about those. I care more about the things I want to do than I care about the things that are against it. But it doesn't mean I don't care about them. You know what I mean? I care when somebody says something about me that I think is wrong. It will bother me. I just don't care enough about it to change what I'm doing, which gives the impression to people that I don't care. But I'm actually quite sensitive. But I've learned more to, like, it's okay. Like, if people don't have to like you, like, the world won't end. They may like you for not like you for good reasons. They may not like you for bad reasons. It doesn't matter. They're not
you know
good.
What? That's a good point, Elle, because that's something people don't like. Again, perception, right? Is that when somebody is at home making their own supper, they're not thinking about you.
Yeah, and
they're probably thinking about making their dinner.
Or even if they are, like, good for them, But, like, if I'm in your head, whatever, But I think that was hard. I think harder to learn. Just doing stuff publicly. And then you're going to meet people that have, and sometimes, like, it can be an overly good impression of you, like, because they're seeing you doing a specific thing. Like, people are seeing me on stage when I'm doing a thing I'm very good at, or at least hopefully, that I'm well prepared. I'm going to be dressed nicely. I'm going to, I'm performing. And that's not how I'm going to be if you see me on the bus when I'm coming from the gym,
Yeah, exactly.
So
you're an Atlantic Canadian. You're still going to go running.
yeah, like when I'm in the grocery store or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I mean, you can't obsess about that, like good or bad.
It's good advice.
You cannot try to live up or down to a version of yourself. You have to give yourself the grace to change. Like I've changed a lot in things I've done. I don't think the same way now as even when I look at the Examiner from the sort of 5 years, like the beginning was different than the end. You change as you're writing. You change as you're thinking, and that's good.
Actually, I like the word grow.
Yeah.
I feel like whenever I do a piece or whenever I do a body, any work that I do, or even if I'm consulting with somebody, I think that I feel like I learn something every time. Like when I was in the classroom helping out I almost said school board, but there are no school boards anymore. When I was helping out the education system by doing that in my own little way, I was learning from those kids. I was learning quite a bit. I was learning what they were interested in. I was learning, but I was learning from the experience of keeping their attention. There's no better practice for a communicator than to have a whole day of activities to do and the responsibility of connecting with each one every day, just once. That's what they tell you to do. And I love that. I actually love the activity. I just think, but to your point though, I felt like every time I connected with a child, even for a split second, I was growing a little bit. I was learning something. I was getting something from that person. And I was getting the satisfaction of knowing that if I connected with them and I'm getting something out of it, then the chances are, so are they.
And it's so much easier, because I'll go in and give like guest lectures, which is a one-off. And that's so much easier to be impressive than every day in your own classroom, then they're like, where's the marking? Like, where's my grades? And just they're going to see you when you're on an off day. They're going to see you when you are kind of like not super prepared. Like you realize halfway through the lecture, they're going to see all of that, which is different than when you sail in and do the thing that you know how to do best and like perform or something. But yeah, I just think that we have to give ourselves grace on that. I think as writers, artists, advocates, whatever, we're going to make mistakes. I think we don't talk enough about our mistakes, particularly as advocates. There's so many things I've done that if I had it back, I wouldn't do it that way now. But I suppose I had to do it that way to learn. I've not been successful in everything I've done or chosen to do. There's definitely things I look back on with like shame or agony or cringe at myself for doing.
But you learned from
Yeah, and you learn. And then also you have to have a good sense of humor, man. And that's the last thing about being an artist. You have to be able to laugh at yourself.
Definitely. I have to be able to sit down here and say, man, editing this podcast episode is killing me.
Yeah, you can't take yourself too seriously. I mean, we're having a like serious discussion, but you can't take yourself, if you can't laugh at yourself and if you can't take critique and if you can't sort of look at yourself and be like, oh, there's me doing that. Oh, there I am doing that thing that I do. You have to be able to sort of step outside yourself too. So.
Elle, you just answered. The question was going to be, what advice do you have for artists who are stepping into anything or advocates? And I think you just answered that. I think you just answered that. So we're going to do one quick break. I'm cognizant of your time. So when we come back, I just have one more question for you. And we'll be back with that question right after this. Elle is just about to tell us about her book, Abolitionist Intimacies. I haven't read the book, so what I did was I went to fernwoodpublishing.ca, searched Elle Jones, and it came right up. So if you're interested in getting a good look at what it takes to advocate for change, go to fernwoodpublishing.ca and order your copy of Abolitionist Intimacies. All right, let's get back into this. Okay, we're back. Let's get back to it. Elle, first, before I ask you this question, because I end on this question, it's kind of my thing. I've developed this consistent outro for these videos that I'm just getting started with. My audience is virtual. Well, it's actually the smallest audience it could be. I'm starting from zero, and something that I know that you can appreciate about what I am doing is that you got to start somewhere. And you got to do it. And that's what I'm doing. And before I start marketing this, like actually telling people about it, I just want to tell you, I'm grateful for you coming in and taking a chance on me. You are a journalist mind, writing mind. That means that no doubt You, when I invited you to come here, you probably looked me up. You did your due diligence like you would.
I actually didn't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So,
and then literally when I was walking to your apartment, I'm like, what if this is a psycho?
you know what?
And then I'm like, but he wouldn't give me all his info on email so he could be traced.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Yeah.
It was because I was away.
Yeah, that's why I have like, because I depend for that, because I'm cognizant of that, by the way. Safety and, all that is very important to me. And so what happens is that what I do there is I make sure, this is actually a good tip for artists and people doing this kind of thing, is that I make sure that my LinkedIn profile is all looking good. Mostly I'm trying to get yeses instead of nos, because I get a lot of nos for that reason. Oh yeah, that's why that's my point. My point is that I'm not known. And so what you've done is you've taken a chance on me. And so I'm grateful for that. Thank you for that. And this has been great, by the way. I think if somebody were the audience for this, I'm picturing young people. I'm picturing Atlantic Canadians who want to maybe pick up more, do some more art, whether they want to transition into that and make a career as an advocate, an artist, or anything, or any kind of entrepreneur, or perhaps they want to start something on the side of what they do. And because I think there's a lot
Oh my God, yeah. Side hustle becomes, like I said, sorry, I'm like breaking in, but I think that's really important. Part of the reason why, because if I am able to do something, I usually try to take it up, because you don't know. Like when Tim said, do the Examiner, I didn't think I'd be ending up as a journalist. First time I hit the stage for spoken word, I was just like on a whim kind of thing. Like nothing that I've done, I've ever mapped out in terms, other than my career, I guess, like academically. But even then I changed fields like 900 times. I don't think I've ever sort of started at zero and said, I want to be here. I've always just sort of gone along the way, and this thing has happened and I've said yes to this, and this thing has happened, I said yes to this, and I ended up poet laureate. I said yes to this and I ended up a journalist. So, which is kind of my point about how Atlantic Canada works, or how Halifax works, where because you can have those relationships, the more you say yes to things, and you don't know like what's going to happen from that maybe someone else sees this podcast and they say, oh, why don't you come and talk about art at this thing? So I also feel, give yourself as many opportunities as you can, say as many yeses as you can, and some of it will go not for like any, like you don't need to say this is going to go, sometimes just leave yourself open, because you don't know, especially as an artist, you don't know what's going to click, what you're going to enjoy doing, what someone might see and say, you're really good at that, you should do that again, or whatever. So I think especially when you're starting out, like being able to do as many things as possible and say as many yeses as possible, I think it's actually helpful. That's what I did. And like everything from poetry to journalism, advocacy, none of that was planned. It's not like when I was 15, I said I want to do these things. I just was like living my life going along. Hey, I happen to be on the radio. People in prison are calling the radio. Oh, now I'm an advocate. Like it was really stuff like that, just sort of picking up on the moment. And so, yeah.
So actually that does, I am going to wedge one little question in here before the last question, this question I ask all of my guests. Do you have any, you've mentioned during this talk several times that you've got material out. Where can we find that material?
So you can buy my book, Abolitionist Intimacies. It's at Fernwood Press. I know King's Bookstore has it in store. It should be at any independent bookstore.
Okay.
So in Halifax. So, or you can just like order it online. So I think it's a good book. It's about a lot of what we're talking about. It's a lot of sort of my first person experience over a decade of doing advocacy work in prisons with people facing deportation, with women. And then there's also poetry. And then as the book goes on in particular, it gets more personal. So it's also memoir alongside that. So I mean, it's sort of part of the reason why I said, like, I'm like, what's the next book? It is essentially my entire life is in this book. And I'm like, I don't know what else I have to say. Like, I got to sit it all in this book. It is really, so I mean, I'm proud of it as a book. And I think if you're interested in me at all and what I do, or you want to think about activism, what takes place, any of these issues, that's in that book. So I get it.
And like I say, like I told you before, I am a fan of yours. I will look into that.
Yeah.
Here's the last question. Elle, I'm just starting. I don't have a big audience, but I have a dream audience. I have a goal. That dream audience is Atlantic Canada and anyone who is interested in Atlantic Canadian culture, particularly the work that we do here. If my entire dream audience was listening to this right now and they are really paying attention, what would you have to tell them? What would you want to tell them to finish off this episode?
Oh my God, I don't know. Like,
It's a good question, isn't
it
it?
is a good question. And it's like, be cool. I don't know. No, I think everything starts with like believing in ourselves, self-pride. I don't mean that in a believe in yourself. You can, like in a very real way. I think no matter where we are, whatever we're doing, I think that people have vision. Whether that's for their how they're cooking or how they're holding their friendship or at their workplace or how they decorate their home or whatever. Like it's all different for people, and I think it's just you know I think that's beat out of us a lot, especially as we get older. When you're younger, it's like you can experiment, you can do things, you can try, you play different sports, you do different activities, and it's like then you're an adult, and if you're not good at it, and if it's not immediately successful, it's not making you money, then you're not supposed to do it. I think that's not the thing. I actually encourage like just do the things that you want to do. You're not too late to start whatever. Like if you decide you want to be a shot putter and you're 50, like go for it. Like, it's not stupid. It's not ridiculous. I guess that's what I would say. Like that everybody should feel like they have the ability and the access and the right to do the things that they want to do and be the things that they want to be. And it's not too late for that. And it's not too late to write. It's not too late to do whatever it is. And I think we're often taught that if we're not successful in a particular way, if we're not successful at a particular time, if this person isn't watching or reading, then we're made to feel like, why do you even care? And you should give up. And I would say, no, like even if only one person comes in your house and is like, that's really beautiful the way you decorated that. That's why you did it. That's worth it. If it's only you looking at it and you're like, the thing I decorated is really beautiful, then that's good. So I suppose that's what I would say. That so many of the things that are amazing pieces of art, we only recognize after they took place. And if people gave up because people weren't paying attention to that, if people gave up on their thoughts or their writing or their work in the community or their family or whatever it is, there'd be nothing left. So I suppose that's what I would say. And then to you, I would say, as someone who does radio, like I always figured no, 0 people listening and I'm just talking to myself, you know what I mean? And you just don't know who's listening or who might listen. So I think you just, like send your shot in the dark and you don't know where it's going to land. And I think that's good.
And I think I asked the right person to be on the 3rd episode of my show.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah.
And we are going to leave that there for today.
Thank you.
For Elle Jones, I'm Glenn Friel. Thank you for watching this episode of The Business of Making Art. Take care. And
thank you. How do you feel?
I feel pretty good. We just kind of run off like we're talking. And then I put that you actually hear that. You actually say, now we just have to ask.
Okay. You have to.